Hey everyone, Alex here and welcome back to another video of World Conqueror 2. In this video we will be going through the strategies that I use to play this game, I guess, and I really hope that this video will help. And of course, this means that this is the final episode in the How to Win World Conqueror 2 series. So I'm going to use Battle of Curse here as an example because I feel that this is one of the best missions to really showcase the type of strategy that I employ at least. So firstly, what we want to look here is our economy, and generally speaking the game can be categorized into the micro and the macro. Yes, it sounds really silly to be to have that kind of, I guess, unnecessary depth involved when playing such a game, but I feel that it is necessary. So let's hop right into what is the micro. So the micro refers to what basically everything inside your control. So your economy, the front line over here, that basically is basically it looks at what is going on in the territories that you control, as well as the immediate situation on the front line where your forces are directly involved. So it doesn't really, I guess, involve, like, maybe say over here these areas. I would not consider it as part of the micro, and that is in fact, I feel, is a part of the macro, which I will be going in depth later on in this video. So what about the micro? So the micro, as I've said, looks at everything that you can control. So includes your forces, your economy, and everything that you can do. So in my opinion, the first thing that I want to do is you have to have a strong economy. That way you can outproduce the enemy, replace the losses really quickly, and basically just be a huge nuisance to the enemy. That is, I feel, is the most important step in the game, the most basic requirement in order to win the game. So how are we going to build up our economy here? There is going to be a bit of a balance involved between actually producing forces and upgrading our infrastructure. So what do I mean by infrastructure? Cities and industries. These two are the key areas that you must develop if your economy is not particularly looking great. So for example, right here we've got Moscow, which is pretty decent because it's the capital city, which means it gives off quite a bit of output. So yeah, and so let's just say I'm going to attack the enemy right here. So the first thing I will look out for is, of course, key areas of production. What do I mean? Cities, industries, and anything that the enemy can use to produce new units. Take them out first, because those are the regions that the enemy is going to focus their defense on. And once you take those areas, there's basically nothing they can do to stop your armies from capturing the rest of the territory, because they simply have not enough production centers to produce their own units. So usually in this case, in this particular case, the enemy is looking relatively strong right here. So I would definitely want to take the city as fast as possible. And not only that, I want to make sure I allocate a significant portion of what resources I have to producing new units, just in case the enemy gets really tough to fight. So right here I will actually allocate in fact, usually in the first few rounds, it is a more of a wise decision to actually allocate slightly more towards producing units, because in the short run, when you upgrade, say, cities and whatnot, in the short run, they actually cost quite a bit and may actually set you back and prevent you from actually using those resources to produce more units. So right here, I want to take Minsk as quickly as possible because it is right on the doorstep, and if I do not take it, the enemy will be able to use Minsk to produce units to eventually crush me. So that is what we are going to do. So first things first, we want to ensure that our defense is looking pretty solid. So we have our commander here. We'll just send him out to the front lines just in case any sort of thing happens. And then and usually what I do is I will use the rocket artillery and the artillery to attack the enemy first before attacking with my melee units. That way I can chip away at the enemy's health, and sometimes it could weaken them to the extent that they are unable to fight back. So let's say imagine this heavy tank here is an infantry unit, then the rocket launcher's attack will actually be able to significantly damage the infantry such that it will weaken the unit's attacking power. And if you don't believe me, you could try that out for yourself, but that is actually in fact going to be pretty much it for the micro right here. So let's just say I want to take Minsk, so I want to, as I've said before, allocate a good portion of my resources to attack Minsk. So I want to shorten my supply lines, so I am in fact going to do this right here, and I'm going to attack this heavy tank. And why do we want to attack the cities? And there's also a particularly it's a particularly important reason as well, but it's less obvious. And in fact, it is about the length of the supply line. And what do I mean by supply line? I do not mean this supply line right here. I mean basically the distance the units have to traverse from where they are being produced onto the front lines. So that means with a longer supply line, it takes longer for your units to reach the battlefield, and that is definitely not something that we want right here, because if the time it takes for the units to arrive on the battlefield is longer, then the less likely it is that you are able to replace your losses at a sufficient rate. And so that is basically the key things we can take away from the micro aspect of the game. Build up your economy, and also just look at what the enemy has. If they are particularly strong on where your forces are facing, their forces, then you might want to, in the first few rounds at least, allocate slightly more of your resources onto military spending, aka producing more units. And if they are relatively weak and you're really confident that your forces can crush the enemy, then go ahead and just develop your economy up and just make sure that your economy is in a really good shape. Then you will be able to outproduce your enemies and win. So that is the micro of the game. Of course, the game doesn't just revolve around you, it revolves around your allies as well, and more likely than not, your allies are going to be really huge burdens. I would say they are really easy for the enemy to just basically overrun them. And that is why we are going to look at the macro aspect of the game right now, which concerns everything else on the map. So your enemies, your allies, where the front lines are, what is their respective areas of control. So right here, we are going to be looking at, for example, maybe say Zhukov right here, where Zhukov's forces are, and right away we can tell that the Germans have Minsk. I meant Kiev right there, and that is not looking too great because that is a huge production center right there, right on our allies' doorsteps. And if our allies fail to take Kiev back, which they basically always will fail to do so, then the enemy will have the advantage because of a vastly shorter supply line. And in this case, while our allies have a relatively short supply line, they are not really looking extremely well right now, because their economy is in a pretty bad shape. All they really have is this level 3 city and this level 2 industry, and that's it. So that means they are unable to replace their losses, which means the enemy can basically overrun them relatively quickly. And that is where the macro will influence the micro. So what do I mean right here? Because if Zhukov right here is unable to hold the front lines, then the Germans will be able to basically move on our flank and eventually threaten us. And we want to prevent that. So we have to move our forces south to help retake Kiev and basically turn the tide of the battle down south, so that we cannot be threatened on our flank. Because our flank right here is particularly weak. We are really only powerful in the front right here. Our flanks are okay. The northern side is basically, they can't outflank us from there because that is not included in the map. But from the south, it is very easy for the Germans to outflank us and take Moscow, which is our key city right there that we absolutely cannot allow for it to fall into the enemy hands. So we must move down south and we must help our allies. Yes, allies are pretty much they're good to have, but they are definitely not factions that you really want to just look after unless their fate directly threatens yours in this case. So yeah, we will have to help them out in this case, and that is how my thought process goes. Firstly, I want to secure the northern side right here, so that once I start moving my forces down south, I cannot be threatened from these forces right here. So that means my initial attacks will have to be concentrated on Minsk, starting from Minsk right here to this airport, to this industry, and right here where this tank is. And once I clear these forces out, then there will be a gap in the German lines right in the north, because as you can see, it's relatively weak once we take out all these powerful armored units, and then we can safely move our forces down south while a fraction of our forces remain to basically handle the remaining enemy forces right here. So that is how I go through the macro aspect of the game. Really, just look at your allies' positions. If they directly threaten your, if your allies' fates are really directly threatening your fate once they fall, then you might actually want to use some forces to help them out a little bit, just relieve the pressure off of them, because usually the enemy would just focus on you once you join in the fight. And that is one key thing that we have to take note of. And of course, we must look at the different enemies right here. So what do I mean by different enemies? But basically, I mean different AIs. So let's just say we have Goering right here, and then we have Guderian. Okay, so as you guys can see from the color, the difference in color, so that actually means a difference in jurisdiction. And basically, Goering controls this area, Guderian controls everything that is east of Poland. And we want to take that in mind, because once we breach these areas right here, then Goering would be able to, Goering, or in this case the other AI, the other enemy, will be able to pour in forces and reinforce the enemy, which is definitely not something that we want in the early stages, at least, because we do not have enough forces to fight them. And so, for example, let's just say we are playing in Europe 1943 as the Soviets, then we do not really have to care about the Western allies right there, because they're really too far for any effects on the front line to have a significant impact. So proximity does matter in the macro. And likewise with Rokossovsky right here, we definitely do want to help them out a little bit, but just a little bit, because they are just a little bit far from where we are. So there is a little bit of time for us to build our forces if the enemy actually overruns these regions in the south. And yeah, that is a lot of talking right there, and probably not a lot of actual explanation. But essentially, what you want to round it up right here, how do we play in terms of the micro and the macro? So we have to build up our economy. That's definitely the first thing that we want to do, and keep our supply lines short so that we are able to produce new units and get them onto the battlefield quicker. And secondly, looking at the proximity of our allies and the relative strength of the enemy and our allies, and of course comparing it to ourselves, we may or may not want to help our allies out just a little bit to ensure that our flanks remain secure. That is key thing number 2. And number 3, I would say, is we usually go for me at least, I usually go for the ethos of quantity over quality. So instead of building, say, really powerful units like, say, tanks or heavy tanks, I want to focus a little bit more on the infantry and the armored car, because they are slightly more versatile in the sense that they're generally quite they generally have quite a bit of health, and we can replace them really easily because they are cheap to produce and they are fairly mobile as well. Artillery does help in some cases, but most of the time it's too slow to really have an effect on the battlefield when we get into the later stages, because once we start to advance into the enemy's rear areas, then our artillery units will basically be pretty much stuck wherever they are, and they can't really move alongside our armies. So yeah, it is definitely something that you want to take note of. Try not to be too reliant on artillery unless you are going on the defense, because the artillery does allow for it does damage to the enemy without taking any damage itself, unless the enemy, of course, is a heavy tank or artillery, or they are in an area that has a land fort. So that's something that you want to take note. And that is basically pretty much it. It really just depends on your allies. Basically, if they're really close by and they're really getting threatened, we might want to go a little bit more aggressive. And if our allies are really far away, then they pretty much do not concern us. Then we want to focus in on ourselves before we can actually help our allies out, because helping our allies is not the main aim of the game right here. It is actually to ensure that you are in a good shape to fight the enemy off. So with that, I am actually going to end off this video. I hope this video helped, and if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to put them down in the comment section, and I will try my best to respond to each and every single one of them. And of course, you can also just DM me on my Instagram, which I will put on the screen right now, and I will try to respond to them as quickly as possible. If anyone do ask me any questions, just feel free to ask me anything. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And that's going to be it for this video. And once again, really hope that this video has been helpful to anyone who may want to experiment a bit with changing up the strategies and stuff. Of course, this how I play the game is not a perfect way. Definitely is not perfect. There are definitely improvements to be made, but they generally serve as good guidelines to really win the game in almost any circumstance, right? That the game presents itself. And yeah, that's it. So if you have liked this video, please do remember to leave a like, and if you are new to the channel, please do remember to hit that subscribe button. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and of course, goodbye.